Welcome the anointed ones. Watch closely, because what you see now will be nothing like what happens behind closed doors. That's not just a statement, it's a warning. For years, people thought they understood the story, that they had the upper hand, that the game was theirs to control. But here's a fact that will make your jaw tighten. Studies show that over 80% of emotional manipulation collapses the moment the target refuses to react. That means everything they believed they could hold over you, every plan, every subtle attack, every whisper meant to isolate and intimidate, was built on sand, and the tide has finally turned. Right now, somewhere behind locked doors and quiet walls, they are discovering the reality they never expected. Their carefully crafted illusions, the narratives they fed themselves and others, are unraveling in real time. And they are crying. Not the kind of tears that earn sympathy. No, these are the raw, unscripted, regretful, and powerless tears of people who realize too late that control is an illusion, and that the person they tried to break is not only intact, but thriving. It's the sort of scene that would almost be funny if it weren't so humiliating for them. Imagine someone meticulously arranging dominoes for months, confident the tower will impress, only to step back and see it collapse without even touching it. That's the scale of their shock. And every flicker of doubt, every moment of private panic, every tear that runs down unseen faces is proof that you, the chosen one, changed the rules without lifting a finger. What's happening is deeper than revenge or victory. It's the revelation of truth, the kind of truth that makes them confront themselves, their motives, and their mistakes, all while you walk freely, untouched by the chaos they tried to manufacture. This is more than them losing control. It's them facing the undeniable fact that no manipulation, no lies, no schemes, and no subtle attacks can bend someone who refuses to be bent. By the end of this, you'll understand why their tears are inevitable, why their panic is justified, and why the story you're about to witness is not just about them breaking. It's about you rising, and somewhere in the middle of their sobbing and frantic attempts to reassemble a broken image of you, there's a quiet, almost comical irony. They worked so hard to destroy, and yet the only thing they succeeded in breaking is themselves. Number one, their emotional collapse isn't about losing you. It's about losing control of the narrative. For years, they believed they were the author of the story, the one who decided how people saw you, how your actions were interpreted, and how your mistakes were exaggerated. They thrived on shaping perception, carefully constructing narratives that made them look right and you look wrong. Every smile you shared, every small success, every step forward. They had an opinion, a judgment, a label. They weren't just watching your life, they were trying to rewrite it to fit their version of reality. Their power didn't come from what they actually did, but from the belief that no one could challenge the version of you they had created. Then something shifted. Slowly at first, almost imperceptibly, the story began slipping from their grip. People started noticing truths they couldn't control, moments that didn't fit the exaggerated tales they spun. Your calmness, your consistency, your ability to stay above the noise began exposing the cracks in the version of reality they had so meticulously built. And that's when panic set in. The tears, the anxiety, the behind closed doors meltdowns. None of it is about losing you personally. It's about losing the story. Losing the narrative is terrifying for people like this because it's the foundation of their identity. They thrived on having others believe their version of events, and once that belief begins to crumble, everything else collapses with it. Suddenly, they are forced to confront a reality where they are no longer the central authority, no longer the one in charge. They are left with a truth that's raw and unfiltered, and it is overwhelming. What's happening behind the scenes is a reckoning, Their emotional collapse isn't guilt or regret in the conventional sense. It's the sheer shock of realizing that for all their efforts, the control they thought they had was an illusion. They invested years in maintaining influence over perceptions, and now they are powerless to stop the truth from prevailing. That's why they are crying. It's not about you. It's about the empire of lies and manipulation they built that is crumbling right before their eyes, and they can do nothing to rebuild it. Number 2. They finally realized you were never dependent. You were patient. For a long time, they misunderstood your stillness. They thought your willingness to stay quiet, to endure, to wait things out, meant you had no other options. In their minds, patience looked like dependence. They assumed you needed them, that without their approval, access, or presence, you would fall apart. That assumption made them bold. It gave them the confidence to push boundaries, to disrespect you in subtle ways, and to believe you would always be there to absorb it. What they never considered was that patience is a choice, not a weakness. The truth is, you were watching, learning, and measuring everything. You were paying attention to patterns, to words that didn't match actions, to promises that kept shifting. You weren't stuck, you were steady, and that distinction changes everything. When the moment finally came, and you stepped back without drama, without begging, and without explaining yourself endlessly, it shattered the story they had told themselves. Suddenly, the power dynamic flipped. This realization hits hard because it forces them to reevaluate every interaction. They replay moments where they thought they had leverage and now see that you were never trapped. You stayed because you believed in growth, resolution, or time, not because you lacked the strength to leave. That understanding is humiliating for someone who built their confidence on the idea that they were needed. Behind closed doors, this realization creates a quiet kind of panic. They start questioning their judgments, their assumptions, and even their own value. If you weren't dependent, then their influence was never real. It was borrowed, temporary, and granted by your patience. And patience, once withdrawn, doesn't come back easily. What unsettles them most is how calmly you reclaimed your independence. There was no dramatic exit, no public announcement, no attempt to prove anything. You simply moved on. That ease exposes the truth they didn't want to face. You were always capable, always self-contained, always free. They just mistook your kindness and endurance for reliance. Now they're left sitting with that mistake, realizing too late that they didn't lose someone who needed them. They lost someone who chose them, and choosing to walk away is far more powerful than being forced to stay. Number 3. The validation they expected from your downfall never arrived. They counted on it for years. Every insult, every scheme, every quiet manipulation was designed to provoke a reaction. Not just any reaction, but a reaction that would confirm their power over you. They wanted to see you falter, to stumble, to bend under the weight of their attacks. In their minds, your failure was supposed to be a trophy, proof that their efforts mattered and that their influence was absolute. They were convinced that when the moment came, they would finally feel justified, triumphant, and untouchable. But you didn't fall. You didn't crumble. You didn't respond in the way they anticipated. Their expectations collided with reality, and the collision was brutal. The validation they sought, the sense of superiority and control that should have come from your defeat, simply didn't appear. That absence isn't just frustrating for them, it's destabilizing. They spent so much energy investing in the idea that they could manipulate your life and emotions that when the outcome defied their plans, it left them exposed. What they are experiencing now is the kind of disbelief that creeps in quietly at first, then grows into a heavy, gnawing realization. The emotional payoff they relied on for confidence, self-assurance, and justification simply evaporated. They built their strategies around the assumption that your life would reflect their narratives, that your mistakes would confirm their predictions, and that your failures would make them feel seen. None of it happened. And seeing their carefully laid plans collapse without their control triggers a deep, private frustration. This is why they cry behind closed doors, not because you did anything dramatic, not because you sought revenge, but because their imagined reward, the emotional high of your suffering, is gone forever. Their tears are the quiet admission that they were wrong, that they misjudged your strength, and that no amount of plotting can replace the certainty they thought they had. Your resilience became a mirror, showing them how their entire approach was flawed, and how their pursuit of control was meaningless. The absence of your downfall hits harder than any confrontation, because it reveals the truth. They never had the power they assumed, and now nothing can give it back. Number 4. Your survival exposed how unnecessary their cruelty really was. For so long, they justified their actions with stories they told themselves. Every insult, every attempt to belittle, every manipulation had a reason in their mind. They convinced themselves that you provoked it, that you deserved it, or that you wouldn't survive without them being harsh. That was their shield, a narrative that allowed them to feel powerful while ignoring the truth. Their cruelty was never necessary. Your survival stripped that narrative bare. You endured without losing your center, without retaliating in the ways they expected, without giving them the satisfaction of proving them right. That endurance is more than strength. It is proof that their attacks were not a response to reality, but a reflection of their own need to dominate, to control, to feel superior. Watching someone navigate the chaos they created and remain whole forces them to confront something most people never want to face. The harm they caused wasn't justified, and that realization is agonizing. It undermines the foundation of every decision they made against you. When cruelty has purpose, it can be rationalized. When it is revealed as unnecessary, it becomes shameful, embarrassing, and frightening. Suddenly, all the hours spent plotting, manipulating, or whispering behind your back feel wasted. They thought their actions had weight, that they were shaping outcomes, but the truth is stark. The outcomes happened regardless, and you came out intact. The tears behind closed doors are not for your pain, they're for the loss of their story. The story where you were weak, where they were justified, where their cruelty had meaning. They are grieving the realization that you didn't need to be broken to prove your worth. Your survival is a mirror reflecting their unnecessary aggression and the futility of their control. That mirror is brutal because it doesn't lie. It doesn't offer excuses. It simply shows that all the time, energy, and effort spent trying to bend you was wasted on someone who was never theirs to break. And that truth, once seen, is nearly impossible to unsee. Number 5. They are mourning an imaginary version of you that never existed. For years, they built a story in their minds about who you were and how you would respond to them. In that story, you were fragile, dependent, and easily manipulated. Every flaw they imagined, every weakness they assumed, became part of the version of you they could control. They treated this imagined version as if it were real, measuring their own power and success against it, feeling superior because they believed it fit perfectly into the mold they created. That mental image allowed them to justify behavior, to push boundaries, and to treat you however they pleased, all while convincing themselves it was deserved or necessary. Then reality stepped in. The real you, the person they never took the time to understand, refused to fit into the narrative they had constructed. You were stronger, steadier, and more self-aware than they imagined. Every attempt to provoke a reaction, to corner you, to make you falter, failed because you refused to play the role they had scripted. Their carefully built story, the one where they could predict every move and measure every response, collapsed entirely. What they are grieving now isn't actually you, it's the fantasy they invested in for so long. They are mourning the version of you they thought they controlled, the one who would validate their superiority and confirm their strategies. That version never existed, and the reality is far more powerful and uncontrollable than they anticipated. This mourning is silent, private, and intense. It's not accompanied by public displays because admitting it would reveal their misjudgment, their overconfidence, and their inability to see the truth. They cry because they invested time, effort, and emotion into an illusion, only to realize that the real you operates entirely on your own terms. That gap between fantasy and reality is jarring. It forces them to confront how little control they actually had, how flawed their assumptions were, and how irrelevant their manipulations became. The tears behind closed doors are a tribute not to your failure, but to the fact that their imagined version of you, the one they could dominate, is gone forever, replaced by someone they can neither predict nor contain. Number 6. Your restraint forced them to face their own excess. They were counting on you to respond, to match their energy, to react the way they assumed anyone would under pressure. Every insult, every manipulation, every attempt to provoke was designed to elicit a response, a reaction that would justify their behavior and make them feel powerful. They built a world where conflict meant control and chaos meant they were winning. They assumed that your silence, your patience, or your calmness was weakness, a lack of backbone that they could exploit. But you didn't respond the way they expected. You didn't retaliate, escalate, or bend to their will. You maintained your composure, not out of fear, but out of strategy and self-awareness. Your restraint removed the very tool they relied on to validate their behavior. Suddenly, their actions could no longer be rationalized as a response to you. Every cruel word, every subtle attack, every manipulation was laid bare for what it really was: excess. Facing excess is unbearable for people like them. It forces a level of self-awareness they have spent years avoiding. They are confronted with the truth that their behavior was not only unnecessary, but extreme. They are forced to see themselves not as clever or justified, but as overreaching, controlling, and unbalanced. Without your reaction to deflect, excuse, or absorb their behavior, they are left with nothing to hide behind. That's when the tears begin. Not because you hurt them, not because of anything you did directly, but because they are forced to confront themselves honestly for the first time in a long time. Your restraint became a mirror reflecting their excess, and mirrors are unforgiving. Every manipulation, every overstep, every attempt to dominate was suddenly visible, undeniable, and shameful. The power they thought they wielded so effortlessly evaporated, leaving only the stark reality of their own behavior. You didn't attack, you didn't expose, you simply stood steady, and that steadiness forced them to face themselves. That is why they cry behind closed doors. It's the uncomfortable realization that they created chaos where none was necessary, and the person they tried to break showed restraint so profound it left them powerless and exposed. Number 7. They lost the ability to provoke you into proving them right. For so long, every word, every action, every subtle maneuver was designed to push your buttons. They wanted to see you react, to confirm their assumptions, to fall into the trap they meticulously laid out. Your anger, your frustration, or even a moment of doubt would have been a victory for them, proof that their manipulation worked, proof that you were exactly the person they said you were. That reaction was their currency, the way they measured power and control, the way they justified every mean-spirited act, every underhanded tactic. But then, You changed the game. You refused to play. You stopped feeding the cycle, stopped validating their assumptions, and stopped giving them the emotional reactions they craved. That refusal dismantled the entire structure they built around you. Suddenly, all their schemes, all their plans, all their carefully constructed manipulations became meaningless. They lost the one thing they counted on most, your reaction. Without it, their sense of control vanished. What makes this collapse so intense for them is that it forces them to confront the reality they never wanted to see. They cannot manipulate what doesn't respond. They cannot dominate what refuses to bend. Every attempt to provoke is met with nothing, and that nothing is louder than any outburst could ever be. Your composure is not passive, it is a statement, a living proof that they were never in control, that their influence was an illusion, and that their power relied entirely on you choosing to give it to them. The tears they shed behind closed doors are the result of this realization. They are grieving the emotional leverage they once had, the predictable responses that fueled their confidence, and the sense of authority that came from believing they could bend you. Losing the ability to provoke you is devastating because it removes the core of their strategy and exposes their impotence. They are left with nothing but their own reflection, and it is in that reflection they see the truth. They were never as powerful as they thought, and the person they tried to dominate is now untouchable in a way that no argument, no manipulation, and no attack can ever undo. Number 8. Your name stopped triggering loyalty and started triggering doubt. For years, your presence in their life was like a constant validation. Every word they said about you, every story they told, every manipulation hinged on the belief that you were aligned with their expectations, that loyalty would always follow. They treated your name as a symbol of control, a confirmation that their influence was absolute. People around them, consciously or unconsciously, began to mirror their assumptions. Your life, your choices, even your successes were filtered through the lens they controlled, and that lens made them feel untouchable. Then something shifted. Slowly, quietly, your name began to lose the power it once held over them and those around them. The loyalty they assumed was automatic began to waver. Others started noticing things they hadn't before, inconsistencies, misjudgments, subtle cruelties that no longer went unquestioned. The image they built, the narrative they relied on, started to crumble under the weight of reality. When your name came up now, it no longer confirmed their authority. It raised questions. Doubt began to creep in where unquestioned support once stood, and doubt is a far more destabilizing force than direct confrontation ever could be. This is why the breakdown behind closed doors is so intense. They are not just grieving a loss of control over you personally, they are watching the influence they wielded over perceptions, opinions, and judgments slip away. Every miscalculation, every exaggeration, every lie they told is now visible in a light they cannot manage. They see it, they feel it, and they have no shield to protect themselves. The panic, the tears, the private frustration, it all stems from this loss of perceived loyalty. People they thought were firmly in their corner start questioning them quietly, and that quiet questioning is deadly because it exposes the fragility of their constructed world. Your integrity, your consistency, and your refusal to conform transformed your name from a symbol of validation to a mirror of truth. And behind closed doors, they are left facing a reality they cannot manipulate, control, or undo, realizing that the influence they once took for granted is gone, replaced by an undeniable, unstoppable doubt. Number 9, they realized you carry credibility they can't destroy. For years they assumed that your reputation, your words, and your actions were theirs to manipulate. They believed that with enough gossip, distortion, or behind-the-scenes scheming, they could bend public perception in their favor. Every exaggeration they spread, every subtle lie they whispered, every attempt to discredit you was part of a carefully orchestrated strategy. They were convinced that credibility was fragile and that you were vulnerable to the pressure they could apply. But they were wrong. Time and again, you proved that your integrity, consistency, and self-respect were stronger than their attacks. Your credibility isn't based on what others say about you. It's rooted in truth, in behavior, in the way you carry yourself when no one is watching. That is the kind of credibility that cannot be shaken by rumors, distorted narratives, or manipulative schemes. No matter how many lies they circulated, no matter how many people they tried to influence, the foundation of who you are remained intact. The moment they realize this is devastating for them, every plan to smear, every strategy to isolate or control suddenly feels useless. They discover that the power they thought they had over you was an illusion because credibility is not given. It is earned, and you have earned it fully. They cannot touch it, they cannot manipulate it, and they cannot take it away. That is a reality that terrifies and frustrates in equal measure. The tears behind closed doors are the product of this realization. It is not just anger or frustration. It is the bitter truth that their influence has limits, and those limits are defined by the strength of your character. You exist in a space they cannot penetrate, a space where truth and consistency speak louder than any scheme. Your credibility is untouchable, and with that comes freedom, power, and authority, all things they tried to claim but can never truly have. Watching someone stand unshakable, untarnished, and respected while their own attempts crumble is a humbling, humiliating, and unavoidable reckoning. And now, behind closed doors, they have nowhere to hide from it. Number 10. Your calm rewrote the emotional power balance permanently. They spent years assuming that chaos equals control. Every insult, every manipulation, every push and pull was designed to provoke a reaction, to make you defensive, angry, or desperate. They thrived on the turbulence they created because it allowed them to feel powerful, to measure their influence, and to justify their behavior. They thought that by stirring the storm, they were steering the ship, and that your responses were the proof of their authority. But then you did something unexpected. You stayed calm. Your calmness was not passive. It was deliberate, consistent, and unshakable. You didn't need to explain yourself, prove yourself, or fight back to assert your position. Your steady composure in the face of constant provocation dismantled the foundation they relied on for control. Every attempt to destabilize you failed, not because they weren't clever or persistent, but because you refused to play by their rules. That refusal is what rewrote the emotional power balance permanently. They suddenly realized that their leverage was gone. The tactics that once guaranteed a reaction now fell flat. Words that used to sting no longer carried weight. Threats, manipulations, and insinuations lost their impact because you didn't allow them to trigger fear, anger, or desperation. That realization is crushing because they built their identity around being in control, around the belief that your responses proved their superiority. When the reactions stop, the entire illusion collapses. Behind closed doors, their frustration, disbelief, and panic become raw and overwhelming. The power they thought they had, the control they assumed was permanent, was exposed as fragile and dependent on your participation. You didn't need to fight, you didn't need to shout, and you didn't need to retaliate. Your calm was enough. That calm redefined the dynamic forever, proving that true power doesn't come from chaos, manipulation, or intimidation. It comes from steadiness, self-mastery, and refusing to be controlled. And now, every time they reflect on their attempts to dominate, they are faced with the painful truth that the person they tried to overpower has rewritten the rules, leaving them powerless, exposed, and defeated behind closed doors. Number 11. They are grieving the access they'll never regain. For years, they believed they owned a piece of your energy, your attention, your presence. Every interaction, every conversation, every subtle manipulation was a way to secure access, not to your life entirely, but to the parts of you they wanted to control, influence, or feed off. They treated that access like a right, assuming it would always be there, assuming your patience or kindness would keep the door open indefinitely. They relied on it to feel powerful, relevant, and necessary. Then something shifted. You stopped granting what they assumed was theirs. You didn't need to broadcast your independence or make a grand statement. You simply moved in a way that preserved yourself, your energy, and your boundaries. And that is when the grief set in. They aren't mourning you personally. They are mourning the access, the influence, the control they assumed would be permanent. That loss is destabilizing because everything they relied on, the subtle power, the predictable reactions, the ability to shape perception, evaporated. This grief is intense because access is more than proximity. It's influence over thought, emotion, and perception. They thrived on being able to direct or manipulate these things without effort. When that access is gone, so is the quiet authority they built for themselves. Every interaction they now replay in their minds reveals the futility of their attempts to control something that was never theirs to hold. That realization fuels frustration, panic, and ultimately tears behind closed doors. They are left confronting a stark truth. Influence is fragile, and the energy they thought they commanded was never theirs to keep. You have preserved yourself, and in doing so, removed the one thing they counted on to feel dominant. Your boundaries, your strength, and your independence expose the emptiness behind their strategies. The loss of access isn't something they can rebuild, manipulate, or recover, and that finality is what drives the intensity of their grief. Behind closed doors, they are faced with the painful reality that the control they took for granted is gone forever, leaving them powerless and forced to watch from the outside as you thrive without them. Number 12. They can't undo what they revealed about themselves. Every word, every action, every subtle attempt to manipulate or control revealed more than they intended. Behind their masks of confidence and authority, cracks were forming. Cracks that exposed their insecurity, their need for dominance, and the real motives behind their behavior. For years, they believed they could manage perception, control the narrative, and hide their flaws. They assumed that no one would ever truly see who they were beneath the surface. But in trying to influence you, to manipulate the situation, to bend circumstances to their will, they revealed truths about themselves that can never be taken back. This revelation is devastating for them because it strips away the illusions they carefully built around their identity, the confidence they projected, the sense of power they wielded. It all depended on secrecy, on the idea that no one could peek behind the curtain. When you survived, thrived, and maintained your integrity despite their efforts, it forced a private reckoning. They are now confronted with the reality that their actions, their words, and their strategies have permanently exposed aspects of themselves they hoped would remain hidden. That exposure cannot be erased, retracted, or spun. It is permanent, and it is undeniable. The intensity of their private despair comes from the permanence of this truth. They cannot convince themselves otherwise, they cannot manipulate the facts, and they cannot control how those who saw the truth perceive them. Every attempt to rewrite history, to justify their behavior, or to regain a sense of superiority feels futile because the reality is already out there, clear, visible, and undeniable. This is why tears flow behind closed doors. It's not about losing you, it's about losing the illusion they created of themselves. They are mourning their false sense of control, their carefully constructed persona, and the credibility they assumed was untouchable. You forced them to confront the truth of who they really are, and there is no undoing it. That confrontation, private and unavoidable, is raw, humbling, and suffocating. And it is permanent. Number 13. Your integrity outlasted their strategy. They spent years plotting, scheming, and testing boundaries, believing that every subtle manipulation, every whisper behind your back, and every attempt to destabilize you would eventually yield results. They assumed that persistence, pressure, and cunning could bend you, that with enough effort they could shape your life, your decisions, and your reputation to fit their version of reality. They had a strategy, and in their minds it was flawless. Every move was calculated, every action designed to provoke, confuse, or intimidate. They were confident that you would eventually falter under the weight of their tactics. But your integrity didn't bend, your strength didn't crack, your consistency didn't waver. While they relied on shortcuts, manipulation, and fear, you relied on truth, honesty, and self-respect. Where they built structures on shifting ground, you built your foundation on solid principles. No matter how complex their schemes, no matter how many angles they attacked from, your integrity was unshakable. They soon realized that their strategy was failing, not because it wasn't clever, but because it was attempting to move something immovable. This realization is crushing for them. Their plans, which were supposed to guarantee outcomes, began to unravel. Every attempt to discredit, provoke, or destabilize was met with calm, measured responses that highlighted the gap between their intentions and reality. They are left to confront a truth they never anticipated. You cannot be controlled by deception, intimidation, or manipulation. Your integrity, built quietly and steadily over time, proved stronger than every tactic they deployed. Behind closed doors, this is what breaks them. It's the bitter awareness that while they were obsessing over control and influence, the very thing they tried to undermine was untouchable. You weren't reactive, you weren't predictable, and you weren't pliable. You were steadfast. Their strategy failed because it relied on weakness that didn't exist. Their tears are born of the humbling truth that integrity cannot be outmaneuvered, manipulated, or destroyed. And in the quiet of their despair, they are left facing the undeniable fact that they wasted years trying to break someone who could never be broken, proving once and for all that truth and integrity outlast every calculated scheme. Number 14. They are crying because deep down they know they lost something irreplaceable, and it wasn't you. For all their efforts, all the plotting, all the manipulation, they failed to see what truly mattered slipping away. Every scheme they devised, every attempt to control or belittle, was aimed at proving themselves dominant, at securing a sense of superiority they desperately craved. They believed that as long as they could manipulate outcomes, provoke reactions, and dictate perception, they were winning. But what they lost in the process was far more significant than anything they could measure with control or influence. It wasn't you they lost. It was their chance to be better, to be honest, and to grow alongside someone who demanded nothing but integrity and truth. That loss cuts deeper than any external defeat because it is internal. Behind closed doors, they are forced to confront a truth they cannot deny. In trying to dominate, manipulate, and bend the world to their will, they sacrificed opportunities that can never be recovered. They cried when they realized that the bridges they burned, the trust they shattered, and the respect they ignored were irreplaceable. Not because they were gone, but because the moments to earn or maintain them will never return. You stood firm, unshakable, and unwilling to compromise your values. and in doing so, you expose the emptiness of everything they believed they had accomplished. There is no strategy to reclaim what they lost. No lie, no manipulation, no charm can undo the awareness that the real victory, the ability to act with honesty, to nurture trust, to earn loyalty without coercion, was forever out of their grasp. That realization is devastating because it strips away the illusion of power and leaves them staring at a reflection of what could have been if only they had chosen differently. The tears they shed are not for you. They are mourning a version of themselves they can no longer access, someone capable of integrity, empathy, and true connection. And the irony is undeniable. The one they tried to break, the one they underestimated, is the reason they are confronted with this irreplaceable loss. You survive, you thrive, and behind closed doors, they are left with the inescapable truth that the most valuable thing they lost was never yours to take. It was their own chance to rise above themselves. Conclusion. Every step of this journey reveals a truth that many will never understand. Being a chosen one is not about fighting every battle or proving yourself to anyone. It is about standing unshakable, moving with integrity, and allowing the truth of who you are to outlast every manipulation, every scheme, and every attempt to control you. The people who once sought to dominate, belittle, or provoke you are now confronted with the undeniable reality that their efforts were wasted. Behind closed doors, they face tears, panic, and regret. Not because you faltered, but because they miscalculated your strength, underestimated your patience, and failed to see that their control was always an illusion. Through every challenge, every attack, and every subtle attempt to destabilize you, you remained steady. Your calm became your power. Your restraint became a mirror reflecting their excess, and your integrity became untouchable. They cried not because of what they lost in you, but because of what they lost in themselves. Opportunities for honesty, growth, and true connection that can never be reclaimed. The reality is clear. Their tears are a testament to your resilience, your wisdom, and the unshakable foundation upon which your life is built. You didn't need to retaliate, argue, or justify yourself. You simply lived with consistency, and that alone rewrote the rules, exposed illusions, and left them powerless behind closed doors. For those watching this, remember that true power is quiet, steady, and rooted in integrity. It does not require chaos, manipulation, or forcing others to bend. The very people who sought to dominate you now serve as living proof that the strongest victories are the ones achieved without compromise, without losing yourself, and without giving them the satisfaction of seeing you react. Your life, your strength, and your unwavering truth are the greatest statements you can ever make. If this video resonated with you, make sure to subscribe to the channel to stay connected with content that empowers and uplifts. Don't forget to like this video, leave a comment sharing your thoughts or experiences, and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Your support helps keep these truths alive and spreads the message that resilience, patience, and integrity always win. Stay strong, stay grounded, and keep moving forward. The world is watching, whether they realize it or not. God bless you.